Hello, this is Jennifer Martinez, and today we're going to talk about reference angles. What is a reference angle? Well, a reference angle for an angle theta, it's written usually as theta prime, is, I'm going to highlight this, the positive acute angle made by the terminal side of angle theta and the x-axis. That's what goes there. So, for example, let's look at this chart here. This is reference angles for theta prime, where theta is between 0 and 360 degrees. Every angle between 0 and 360 degrees has a reference angle as long as it's not a quadrantal angle. It's not on the x or y axis. If you look at quadrant 2, this is an example in quadrant 2. So here's theta in quadrant 2. And theta prime, again, is the positive acute angle, if you look back up in yellow, made by the terminal side. So here's the terminal side and the x-axis. So they call this theta prime. If you look at a different type of picture, we're going to be making little triangles out of those reference angles down to the x-axis. So if I look at my angle, here it is, there's some angle in the second quadrant. If I go down here, that would make a triangle, this triangle, where the reference angle would be right there. How would we find that angle? You would find that angle by taking, we know this is the negative x-axis, right there is 180 degrees, and this is theta, right here, this is theta from here to the terminal side. So if we take 180 minus theta, we would get that reference angle. But that's not always the case. You have to be careful. I'll erase that because the theta is showing. In quadrant 1, for instance, if you look at the positive acute angle made by the terminal side and the x-axis, it's the same as theta. So here, theta prime would be theta. It would be the same thing. To draw a picture of that, let me do that in green. There it is. And theta prime would be the same as theta. So you wouldn't do anything there. Notice how this looks like a bow tie, right? We do not use the y-axis. I should say this again. The reference angle is found always the reference angle is always found with reference to the x-axis. X-axis. Maybe I should put that in green, a little thicker. X-axis, not the y-axis. So notice how I didn't use on the quadrant 2, I didn't use the 90 degrees, I used the 180 degrees. If you want to subtract something, I guess you could subtract 0 degrees, right? 0 degrees, which is the same thing as theta. Quadrant 3. Quadrant 3, if we look at that terminal side, there it is, there's an angle in quadrant 3, and the x-axis, they label it right there for you, theta prime. How would we find that? Well, this time theta is bigger. Here's the 180 because we always want to do it to the x-axis. So theta is bigger than 180. So this time I'm going to say theta minus 180 degrees. If I show it over here, let's do it in green. I'm going to finish my bow tie. Notice I'm about making a bow tie here. Theta prime would be right in there. Again, I don't use that 270. I don't use the y-axis. I always find it with reference to the x-axis. Okay. The fourth quadrant. The fourth quadrant, it's not always 180 because the fourth quadrant, the positive angle made by the terminal side and the x-axis is shown in this picture here, And that's now the positive x-axis. And we know that this is 360 degrees or 0 degrees, but we're going to call it 360 because we want a positive angle because it's not going to be the same. So we don't want to subtract 0. We're going to subtract 360. And it's going to be 360 is bigger than the angle theta. So it's going to be 360 minus theta. Again, just show it here with a bow tie. We can finish our bow tie. There's something in the fourth quadrant. If I'm going to make a triangle, if I go up to the x-axis, the theta prime would be right there. So let's try this with some numbers. Let's try this with a specific example for something in each quadrant. So let's look at first 50 degrees. Where is 50 degrees? Well, the positive x-axis is 0, and the y-axis is 90 degrees. So 50 degrees, somewhere in between there. Let's make that straighter. Okay, so how would we find the reference angle? I like to make a bow tie. I know this is my reference angle right there, theta prime. How am I going to find theta prime? I'm going to find theta prime by taking theta prime is going to be 50, isn't it? It's the same as theta. If you want to say 50 minus 0, but it's just 50 degrees. That would be the answer for part A. Part B. What about 100 degrees? 100 degrees. Well, where's 100 degrees? Well, here's 90 degrees. Here's 180 degrees. It looks like it's in quadrant 2. Quadrant 2. Somewhere there. 100 degrees. Here's where 100 degrees in. It's in quadrant 2. We just put quadrant 2. This one was quadrant 1. And how do we find the reference angle in quadrant 2? Well, if you think about it logically, we're going to always make that bow tie and go down. So we're going to use the 180 instead of the 90. So it's going to be 180 minus 100, which is 80 degrees. That would be theta prime, and it's labeled right there in pink. Theta prime would be that angle. Which, by the way, that's what our chart told us to do. Oops. Our chart was, it said take 180 minus the angle. 180 minus 100 is 80. Part C is in quadrant 3. Why is it in quadrant 3? Let's look at the picture. We know that this is 180 degrees. And this is 270. That's a quadrantal, 270. So 200 is somewhere in between 180 and 270. So it is in quadrant 3. Let me draw a line here so we understand that that's quadrant 3, not quadrant 1. So how am I going to find that angle? Again, I'm going to go up to the x-axis. And so I'm going to use 180 again, but 200 is larger than 180. So I'm going to do the 200 first. 200 minus 180 is 20 degrees. That is theta prime is 20 degrees. So that is the answer. To see that, that's right there. Theta prime. So again, the whole thing makes sense. The whole thing is 200. And then we're going to subtract 180, and you're left with the 20 degrees. And by the way, in our chart, they did say to take the angle 200 minus 180. Finally, part D must be something in the fourth quadrant. So let's look at D. 300 degrees is in the fourth quadrant. Why? Because, well, a full circle is 360 degrees. We know this is 270 degrees. So 300 is somewhere between 270 and 360. It's going to be somewhere in there. Again, we need to go up to the x-axis. Always draw that bow tie. Imagine the bow tie. You never go to the y-axis. And we're not going to use 1/8 at all, are we? To get that answer, the whole thing is 300. And 360 is larger than 300. So if I take 360 minus that 300, what's left is that little angle inside 30 degrees. That's what I'm going to call my reference angle. Let's do it in pink, really small there. There it is. That is considered my reference angle. 30 degrees. Oh, sorry, I do not know how to subtract. 60 degrees. 60 degrees. And again, if we look at our chart, it says to take 360 minus the angle. 360 minus 300 is actually 60 degrees. Hope that helps.